It can strip from them what little liquidity they probably have. It can lead to much higher fulfillment costs than are necessary, and that can be the difference between success and failure.
What are some of the things that business owners will often overlook in terms of when they're making their product choices and how that affects their value chain?
Well, when it comes to say the logistics piece, I see a number of things that are frequently overlooked by folks who haven't worked with product before, haven't sold product before in any appreciable way, at least online. Mm-hmm. So one thing, for instance, is they don't quite recognize the impact of weight. An ounce here or there can make all the difference. For instance, a major point of demarcation in the shipping world is between under a pound and over a pound. So there's a big difference between 15 ounces and say just over 16 ounces. Here's the main reason why. At 15 ounces, you can ship anywhere for a pretty low cost. As soon as you get to a pound, that's where you can't go on an ounce basis anymore, but say 17 ounces is rounded up to 2 pounds. And the cost goes up quite a bit as well. So recognizing that different weights bring about different cost structures on the shipping side, and also to a degree on the pick-pack side as well, is important. If you can, all other things being equal, if you can make things a bit lighter, that often will be advantageous from a profit perspective.
So when you say that, is that from the perspective of the product itself being light, or is that the entirety with the shipping and all of that?
It's a good question. It's certainly the product. The product's going to play a role in it, but it also would include the packaging materials as well. So the final shipping weight is important. Okay. If you're way under a pound, an ounce here or there may not make a big difference. But if you're close to that demarcation line, it does. Or if you're close to the demarcation line between say 2 pounds and over 2 pounds, which is between 2 and 3 pounds, or 3 and 4 pounds, or 4 and 5 pounds, that's where things are especially critical. But it's not only the product, but also the materials that are required to get it to wherever it's going.
Understood. So weight is one of the big factors that will change the cost structure of the business. What's another one of the factors?
Well, beyond weight, something you need to take into consideration would be the dimensions of the product and really the product and the packaging materials that it ships out in. Because a fraction of an inch here or there can actually make quite a bit of difference too. Increasingly so, as almost all the carriers now are charging what's called dimensional weight or volumetric based weight with most of their service classes.
So the more space that your product and what it's being shipped in takes up, the more you're being
exactly. It's charges that are based on the volume, right, as opposed to just the actual weight itself. So what they'll do is most of the carriers now will charge you whatever is higher based off of actual weight or the volumetric weight. So if you have a great big package with a feather in it that doesn't weigh anything, they're going to charge you as if it weighs a lot. Yeah, exactly. So that's something that we really need to be concerned with. And again, a fraction of an inch could be the difference between paying for actual weight versus paying for volumetric weight, and let's say it's the kind of difference that takes you from 1 pound to 2, or from 2 pounds to 3, and sometimes it's worse than that. Sometimes it could be you got a 1 pound product, and yet because of the way you choose to present it with your packaging materials, maybe a custom box, just that's big and bold and exactly what you think you need from a branding perspective, but then all of a sudden it has dimensional weight of 5 or 6 pounds,
and now you can't make any profit.
Exactly. Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. And what about what's the next consideration?
So weight is key, dimensions are key, and the impact that dimensions have on volumetric or dimensional weight. The other big thing I would suggest is that folks forget about or just don't recognize is that SKU count matters a great deal.
Can you explain SKU count?
Yeah, so SKU count has to do with the number of unique items that you're attempting to sell. There's a lot of reasons to try, as to why you should probably increase your SKU count. It helps to get average order values higher. It helps to ensure that you've got better conversion on the website, because the more you've got there, as long as it's cataloged and presented well, the more likely it would seem that you can get somebody to buy something. That being said, the more SKUs you have, the more complicated the pick-pack environment is going to be, the larger larger your inventory is going to be, and the more money that'll probably have to be tied up in it. SKU count can really cause problems for folks that don't have a lot of experience in the product selling space. It can strip from them what little liquidity they probably have. It can lead to much higher fulfillment costs than are necessary, and that can be the difference between success and failure. So I always encourage folks to try to minimize SKU counts if possible in the beginning until they get a better feel for what it is that they're doing.
I could see that being a very overlooked issue, because you wouldn't necessarily think if I'm selling more things that's somehow going to make shipping any one of them more expensive, but because of just the added complexity of the entire
just
system.
Think about the amount of space, right, that has to be afforded to a larger SKU count. And if you have 5,000 units of a small item and it's the same thing, you can palletize it. It doesn't take up hardly any space at all. If you have, say, 2 or 3 units of 5,000 different items, or even just say a single unit to make it equivalent of 5,000 different items, you can't put that on one pallet because then you can't pick it. So all of a sudden it's got to spread across, shelving unit after shelving unit after shelving unit, and I find that a lot of earlier stage clients are surprised when they get their first storage bill and it's like, hey, you're using hundreds of cubic feet, and they're expecting to be using a pallet or two, but it's because we have to be able to pick. We got to be able to pick accurately and efficiently, and that can only be done with things being spread out and made pickable.
So it sounds like because of these are very commonly overlooked things. How would one go about getting these numbers?
It's just something you really got to look into. You've got to take a look at your product and say from a weight perspective, get an idea as to where it is, and if it's near those demarcation lines, then is there anything that you can do to take the weight down further? Same thing from a dimensional perspective. Is there anything you can do to make your product more efficient? And from a SKU count perspective, is there a way that you can focus on the top SKUs? I mean, Pareto distributions tend to exist in most product seller environments, and by that I mean you've got a small number of SKUs doing most of the work anyway. So if you have a way, say via testing or whatnot, to determine what those most important SKUs are, maybe you can avoid bringing a lot of excess SKUs in the first place and try to focus a little bit more on what's likely to say deliver for you when you choose to scale.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like real good advice is really try to trim that fat when it comes to that product, when it comes to what you're shipping it in, and even when it comes to those excess SKUs and those excess variations of product. Really appreciate the advice, Peter.
You got it.